Hello, dear YouTube viewers. I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. A young man had always lived his life with quiet dignity. He worked hard, kept his promises, and believed in building relationships on trust rather than grand displays. His nature leaned towards silence rather than noise, modesty rather than arrogance. Friends often described him as reliable, someone who could be counted on in difficult times. Yet his introverted personality often made him the quieter one in gatherings, someone who avoided unnecessary arguments and preferred to swallow his discomfort instead of creating conflict. For the last 2 years, he had been in a relationship with a woman he truly believed was his partner for life. They had shared countless days of laughter, late-night talks, and moments where the future seemed clear. But beneath the surface, cracks had already started forming. She often complained that he was too simple, not exciting enough, too cautious in a world that valued boldness. Communication between them was not always smooth. She sought thrills and comparisons, while he only wanted stability and care. Still, he tried to keep things together, hoping his loyalty would eventually win her full respect. One evening, they were invited to a gathering. It was supposed to be a casual dinner with friends and family, filled with music, laughter, and light-hearted conversation. He accompanied her, dressed neatly, though not extravagantly, smiling politely at everyone. He felt slightly out of place among the louder personalities, but he tried to make her comfortable. She, on the other hand, thrived in the spotlight, speaking loudly, joking freely, and drawing attention to herself. As the conversation shifted to relationships and past memories, someone teasingly asked her how her current partner compared to her ex. She laughed at first, brushing it off, but then leaned in with a smirk. "Honestly," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "my ex was better than him, in everything." The words landed like a slap in the middle of the room. For a moment, silence fell, then laughter broke out. Some guests chuckled nervously, others whispered, and a few outright mocked him with glances full of pity. He sat frozen, his heart pounding. Outwardly, he forced a faint smile, pretending it didn't matter. Inwardly, it felt like something inside him had cracked wide open. Humiliation spread through him like fire. He had endured many quiet criticisms before, but never in such a cruelly public way. The woman he loved, the one he had protected and trusted, had reduced him to a punchline before strangers. He couldn't even muster words to defend himself, because doing so would only feed the laughter. So he lowered his eyes, swallowed his pride, and let the laughter pass. She, meanwhile, basked in the attention. She laughed along, continued sipping her drink, and moved the conversation forward as if nothing had happened. To her, it was just another bold remark, another way to be noticed. To him, it was betrayal disguised as a joke. Later that night, as the music grew louder and people lost themselves in chatter, he quietly stood up. Nobody noticed him leave except for the echo of his footsteps and the heaviness in his chest. Outside, under the cool night air, he finally allowed his expression to collapse into pain. Thoughts rushed violently. Was he not enough? Was his love meaningless? Did she truly believe her ex was better? Each question cut deeper than the last. By the time he walked away from the venue, one thing had already begun to shift within him. He had always been patient, forgiving, and silent. But tonight, silence had cost him his dignity. Beneath his calm exterior, something darker stirred, anger mixed with resolve. For the first time, he wondered not how to fix the relationship, but how to make her understand the weight of what she had done. He disappeared from their shared routines the way a winter sun slides behind clouds, present in memory, absent in warmth. For days he stayed in the apartment that had once echoed with two voices, moving through rooms with the mechanical motions of a man performing chores he could no longer feel. He slept at odd hours, walked the neighborhood under streetlights, and let the television murmur to a hollowed-out audience of one. He answered the calls that needed answering with careful brevity and avoided gatherings where her laughter might again reduce him to a curiosity. Isolation wrapped itself around him, not as punishment, but as a space for thought, a place where the raw sting of public shame could be examined without an audience. Alone, his mind replayed small, stubborn memories until they formed a map of how he had tried, how hard he had tried, to be the man she wanted. He remembered the night she lost her temper with her sister, and he had sat between them, bearing the blame until the storm passed. He remembered the months he had covered for her when payday fell short, lending her money without question, never asking for receipts, aware that trust is sometimes more valuable than a ledger. He saw again the hospital corridor where he had waited while her father had tests run, holding her hand until her fingers relaxed, and she was able to breathe without trembling. He had patched up arguments with late-night calls, given up small pleasures to surprise her with quiet comforts, and refused to escalate when her temper flared in front of friends. These were the stitches he had used to keep their life from fraying. When those memories settled, a harsher truth rose in their place, one he had suspected but allowed himself to ignore. She had a habit of comparing, of weighing people like coins in a palm. Complaints about his simplicity had always been couched in jokes or directed toward friends, but the pattern was there, an undercurrent of disdain for the ordinary. The public remark at the dinner was not a one-off lapse. It was the loudest beat in a rhythm of belittlement. He could list the ways she had minimized him. The eye rolls when he spoke cautiously, the delighted recall of an ex's daring escapades, the thinly veiled disappointment when his gifts weren't flamboyant enough. The more he sifted through the past, the clearer it became. His loyalty and quiet sacrifices had been invisible to the person whose praise he most craved. He tried to move forward as if nothing had changed. But life kept presenting small, sharp reminders that nothing was the same. At a friend's barbecue, she told the same story she told in the restaurant. Only this time she added new, cruel details. At an office get-together, a colleague mentioned how impressed they had been with her ex's job promotion, and she laughed in a way that suggested he was a footnote. At first he numbed, then the numbing failed. The laughter that had once washed over him like a cold wave began to etch itself into a line of grievance. It was in that slow accumulation of dismissals that his anger deepened beyond the first sting of humiliation. The decisive moment came not with another grand insult, but in a private, careless conversation she had with a close friend, one he would have never intruded upon if not for a small, accidental eavesdrop. He had been near the cafe where she met a friend for lunch, intending only to return a library book. He paused by the window and, out of a mixture of habit and pain, slowed to listen. The words were simple and brutal. He's weak, useless, and boring. I can't believe I settled. The friend laughed and agreed. They traded anecdotes about how he would never be exciting enough. Those words cut differently because they were not performance for a crowd. They were candid. She was speaking plainly, away from eyes that might soften her cruelty. She didn't even disguise her contempt. That private confession changed something fundamental. It confirmed that the public humiliation had not been an accident of attention-seeking. It was her genuine judgment. The realization did not bring immediate retaliation. For a moment, he only felt a profound sadness at having misread his place in her life. Then, beneath the ache, a colder resolve gathered itself. He could have confronted her with fury, could have raged and broken the fragile peace into dramatic pieces. Instead, a methodical thought took hold. If she intended to wound him publicly, perhaps he could return the harm in a way that matched her cruelty, quietly, efficiently, and utterly unanticipated. He did not become a different man overnight. He became a man with a purpose. He started by observing rather than reacting, by cataloging slights and secrets like a ledger. He listened in on the relationships she cultivated, noting who owed her favors and who had been slighted. He rekindled conversations with people she had burned, an old colleague who had been blamed for a mishap at work, a cousin whose loan request had been refused with a public rebuke, a childhood friend who had moved away after a rumor she started. He found a thread of resentment in many corners. At the same time, he began to look closer at her daily life, not out of voyeuristic malice, but to find the fulcrum on which her comfortable life balanced. In late-night searches through bills and old receipts, papers she carelessly left on a shared table, he noticed inconsistencies, unpaid notices tucked beneath glossy shopping bags, membership emails to expensive clubs she'd never mentioned, and messages from lenders that suggested more than the casual spending she had admitted to. He discovered the occasional flirtatious text exchanged with a coworker, and a vague promise to someone that hinted at an unresolved debt. These were not extravagant sins. They were the small, practical frailties that, when gathered, could topple a carefully curated image. He did not decide to use these discoveries in a blaze of accusation. Instead, he planned, quietly and without drama. He started to approach those she had wronged with empathy, not malice, reminding them of slights and offering them an avenue to be heard. He built alliances not on shared hatred, but on a mutual desire for truth to be acknowledged. Each conversation, each small confirmation of her duplicity, became a stone in a structure he was building, a trap that would not snap in a moment of passion, but would close with the inevitable weight of accumulated proof. He began by studying her as if she were an unsolved puzzle, peeling back layers of charm to reveal the rot beneath. The picture that emerged was sharper than the one he had allowed himself to see before. She had cheated on her ex, not just once but repeatedly, and then justified it with excuses about how he had not been enough for her. She had taken loans from questionable sources, men and women who did not forgive easily, and spun stories about temporary struggles to excuse the mounting debt. And perhaps worst of all, she thrived on the destruction of others' reputations. He uncovered instance after instance of rumors she had started about friends, claims that one had stolen money, another had cheated on her husband, another was secretly jealous of her. These lies had been the mortar of her social standing, lifting her above others by pushing them down. Each weakness became more than a discovery. It became a weapon. Infidelity proved her hypocrisy. Debt revealed her recklessness. Lies highlighted her cruelty. He realized she had built her world like a fragile glass tower, sparkling under the right light, but waiting for the right strike to shatter. His revenge did not need to be loud or violent. All it required was to place a hand on the weak points and push gently, letting gravity do the rest. The first strike came in the form of social exposure. Another gathering, another evening of laughter and casual boasts. Only this time he arrived prepared. He didn't accuse or shout. He asked questions. When she spoke about a vacation she had supposedly taken with her own savings, he casually mentioned how surprising it was considering the unpaid bills he had seen at home. When she bragged about a long-standing friendship, he mentioned in passing how odd it was that the friend no longer returned her calls. He never accused, only hinted, planting seeds of doubt in the soil of people already suspicious of her. The room began to tilt against her. Friends who once admired her confidence now exchanged skeptical glances. The laughter that usually followed her jokes turned into half-smiles, whispers blooming in the corners of the room. She felt it. He could see it in the way her shoulders stiffened, in the way her glass remained longer in her hand, as if she needed it to shield herself. For the first time, she no longer controlled the stage. The cracks in her image, invisible before, now spread in plain sight. He didn't need to press further. Silence and suspicion would do the work for him. But social isolation was not enough. He knew her pride, and pride without comfort would wither quickly. He moved to the second phase, the financial trap. For months she had used his money freely, justifying her spending as harmless indulgence, brushing off his quiet warnings. He had seen receipts for expensive restaurants he had never been invited to, credit card charges for designer bags that had appeared suddenly in her closet, travel confirmations that did not align with her supposed weekend visits to relatives. He had ignored them before, but now they became the blueprint of her downfall. He quietly severed the financial cord. Bank accounts she had access to were secured with new passwords. The credit card she used freely was canceled. He stopped covering her rent, her bills, her luxuries. At first, she didn't notice. Her habits carried on as if nothing had changed. But then the calls began. The electricity company, the landlord, the credit card company, each demanding payment. Shopping bags that had once filled her hands grew scarce. The dangerous lenders, whose names she had whispered in late-night phone calls, now demanded repayment with a firmness that frightened even her. The transformation was swift. The woman who once bragged of independence and superiority found herself cornered by numbers and demands. Friends she had mocked could not lend money. Family members, tired of her dramas, refused to help. Each day, without his support, added weight to her shoulders, bending her posture, thinning her smile. She was learning the taste of desperation, a flavor he had swallowed silently for years while she dismissed his sacrifices as ordinary. Yet the final act of his plan was still to come, the betrayal revealed. For this, he gathered evidence meticulously. Screenshots of flirtatious messages, records of late-night calls, confirmations from acquaintances who had seen her in places she should not have been. He assembled it not like a weapon for a private fight, but like a presentation prepared for an audience. He knew exactly when and where to unveil it, in front of the same people who had once laughed when she declared her ex was better. The evening came like a carefully set stage. Another social circle, another round of casual chatter. She attempted, with what remained of her confidence, to reclaim her role as the center of attention. She joked, she gestured, she smiled with painted ease. That was when he spoke, softly, not angrily, almost conversationally. He mentioned the late-night messages she had sent to another man while claiming to be sick at home. He produced a screenshot, projecting it onto the screen of a phone for all to see. The room stilled. Then he showed the receipts of expensive hotels charged to his card when she claimed to be visiting relatives. Then the confirmations from friends who had witnessed her betrayals firsthand. He did not raise his voice or dramatize. He simply laid the truth out like a surgeon revealing a disease to a crowd of witnesses. One by one, the masks she had worn slipped. Gasps spread through the room, followed by whispers. The same mouths that had once laughed at him now opened in shock, and then, slowly, cruelly, turned their laughter toward her. She tried to protest, to twist words into excuses, but the weight of proof smothered her defense. Every denial met with another piece of evidence. Every excuse countered with a record she had left behind in her arrogance. The more she struggled, the more tangled she became in the web of her own making. In that moment, he did not feel joy so much as release. The humiliation he had once endured had been returned in kind, magnified by her own actions. The room that had mocked him now pitied him and scorned her. Her empire of lies, debts, and betrayals crumbled under the collective gaze of those she had once sought to impress. She was no longer the woman who had laughed at his silence. She was the spectacle, the one whose downfall became the evening's entertainment. And for the first time in years, he walked away not as the shadow at her side, but as the man who had reclaimed his dignity. The aftermath of that night rippled through her life with a speed she had never imagined. Word of the exposure spread faster than fire in dry grass. The friends who once flocked around her for gossip and laughter now answered her calls with silence or flimsy excuses. Group chats she had dominated went on without her. Gatherings took place where she was no longer welcome. Invitations disappeared, and when she tried to join unannounced, the icy stares and polite dismissals told her more clearly than words she was no longer part of their circle. At first, she told herself it was temporary. Friends get offended and come back, she thought. But days stretched into weeks, and the distance only grew. Every whisper she overheard in public, every chuckle behind her back, reminded her that the stories were no longer hers to tell. She had become the story, one of betrayal, deceit, and downfall. Her family was no different. Parents who once defended her against every accusation now struggled to look her in the eye. Siblings who had envied her confidence treated her with pity and caution, unwilling to be dragged into her mess. Her mother asked quietly how she could have lied so brazenly, how she could have shamed the family name in front of everyone. Her father, stern and disappointed, told her to fix the disaster you created before asking us for help. The trust that had always been her safety net dissolved, leaving her alone in a way she had never known. The cruelest blow came from the one she had held above him, the ex-boyfriend she had praised so loudly, whose shadow she had used as a weapon against her partner. When she tried to rekindle that connection, desperate for an anchor, he laughed. "You think I'd take you back after everyone knows what you did? You're a joke now." His words were not just rejection. They were a mirror reflecting her arrogance back at her. The pedestal she had placed him on crumbled under his mockery, leaving her scrambling with nothing to hold. Everywhere she turned, she was met with gossip, shame, and rejection. At cafes, people she had once known leaned closer to whisper as she walked past. At work, colleagues treated her with a thin veneer of professionalism, but the glances told the truth. They saw her not as capable but as scandal. Even strangers who had heard the tale secondhand judged her from afar, piecing together fragments of rumor into a portrait of disgrace. She had built her identity on social approval, and now that approval was gone, leaving her identity fractured and hollow. In her desperation, she turned to the one person she had once ridiculed, the man she had humiliated. She came to him not with arrogance, but with trembling hands and tearful eyes. Her words were broken, stitched together by sobs. She begged him to stop, to undo the damage, to silence the voices that laughed at her downfall. She promised to change, to apologize, to start again if only he would give her a chance. For the first time, she was not the one holding power. She was the one on her knees. He listened, but his face was calm, almost unreadable. There was no anger in his eyes now, only a stillness that carried more weight than fury ever could. When she finished pleading, he let the silence hang long enough for her to feel its weight. Then he spoke, each word deliberate and measured. "You compared me to your ex. Now you'll compare your life before me and after me." The sentence struck harder than any public humiliation she had endured. In that moment, she understood what she had thrown away. She realized he had been the only one who gave her steady love, the only one who bore her storms without complaint, the only one who had carried her through struggles she couldn't face alone. All the people she had praised, all the masks she had worn, none of them had been genuine. He had been genuine, and she had mocked him for it. Her tears could not erase the truth. Her apologies could not rebuild the trust she had burned. She saw clearly, perhaps for the first time, that the life she had mocked was the life that had sustained her. And now it was gone, slipping through her fingers like sand. He walked away, leaving her with silence as her final punishment. She was left to sit with the wreckage of her choices, the echo of his words replaying in her mind. The comparison she had once used to wound him now became her curse, a reminder that the measure of a person is not in bold gestures or fleeting attention, but in loyalty, respect, and quiet strength. In the weeks that followed, he found himself walking lighter, as though a burden had slipped from his shoulders. The whispers that once stung now carried a different tone. Respect. People who had once laughed at him began to greet him with quiet nods of acknowledgement. They had seen the truth unfold with their own eyes, and in their silence there was a recognition. He had endured humiliation, and instead of collapsing, he had risen with dignity intact. His days grew calmer, his focus sharper. For the first time in years, he lived not in the shadow of someone else's mockery, but in the clarity of self-respect. She, on the other hand, wandered through the ruins of her own making. Alone in rooms once filled with friends, she replayed every moment where arrogance had guided her tongue. The laughter she once relished now returned to her as echoes of scorn. Pride had been her crown, but without loyalty to anchor it, that crown had turned to ashes. Even her reflection in the mirror seemed like a stranger, a woman stripped of applause, weighed down by regret. She realized too late that love without respect cannot last, and respect once broken cannot be rebuilt by promises or tears. Their paths never crossed again. He had no need to revisit the wreckage she had become, and she had no strength to face the man she had destroyed, only to watch him rise stronger. The story closed not with reconciliation, but with a truth as sharp as any blade. Respect is fragile. Once broken, no love can survive. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe. Our channel, Awesome Visual Story,